We were all trying to be happy, but we're not, and trying to be calm, but we were only loud. And there was this one girl, she was sitting there very calm, very quietly, and I was very impressed. And I asked her, how come you're so calm, you're so quiet, you seem so tranquil? And I was then inspired by two other friends who were in the monastery to come to a 10-day course on love. And that was vipassana by S.N. Goenka. So from January 4th, 1975, I found my path, my way, a reason to live. La raison d'être, they say in French. The voice of S.N. Goenka, the honesty of S.N. Goenka, and the total commitment was enough. I was back in Europe, and then the word went around that anybody that wanted to come for an extended period of time to Burma, if you ordained as a monk, could come. And that was, I think, the biggest opportunity. We landed in Rangoon. They picked us up. The same day, they shaved our head, changed our clothes, and we were already in monk's clothes. So the first thing that surprised me was they had to shave our head. Not that I was so proud of my little hair, but it really was mine, and they were taking it away. Now that I'm here back after 40 years, what I remember of having been a monk is a feeling of being welcome. And that's something that I don't have in other places in the world.
There is no record of any extraterrestrial Dhamma retreats, at least in the tradition of S.N. Goenka. But a common refrain is heard across the kitchens and Dhamma halls of vipassana centers in this tradition is that when the first non-center 10-day retreat happens on the moon, Daniel Mayer will likely be the one leading it. It's not hard at all to believe it either, because that statement just about sums up the Dhamma life of this senior vipassana teacher, who has spent his career bringing the teachings of liberation from his own teacher, Goenkaji, into villages spread far and wide throughout Latin America and Africa. Few teachers in the tradition have consistently faced such diverse, challenging, and unpredictable situations when conducting courses. Although his modesty would suggest otherwise, Daniel's continued effort and deep sense of service is justifiably legendary. When I first heard he was passing through Yangon, I knew it would be a rare chance to get to speak with this nomadic Dhamma teacher. I just didn't know how rare it really was. I later found out that this marked only his second visit to the Golden Land, the first one coming 40 years ago when he ordained at the International Meditation Center. So it was a rare opportunity, indeed, and a privilege to get to hear the wisdom and stories of this peripatetic octogenarian. The enthusiasm you will so plainly hear in his voice was accompanied by a twinkle in the eyes that only added to his charm, along with a sense of spontaneity that seemed ready to leap out around the next corner of our conversation. Daniel arrived at my home studio in the company of two other Vipassana teachers, one from France and the other Switzerland. The latter surprised us with a gift of hand-carried Swiss cheese all the way from back home. Daniel, meanwhile, roamed around our house, complimenting our taste and inquiring about the origin of a number of objects, bursting out in delightful fits of giggles at every answer. I could tell right away that our conversation was going to be a lot of fun, and I was not to be disappointed. The four of us entered the studio, with one teacher sitting on the floor in meditation for the duration of the talk, and the other recording the first part on his camera phone, periodically bursting into silent laughter from Daniel's stories, which he had to muffle so it wouldn't get picked up by our sensitive mics. Yet amidst the lightness and levity, a laser focus took shape in Daniel's eyes when reflecting on a question, before he launched into a detailed and insightful reply. The interview done, we enjoyed a lunch in which it was my turn to respond to a host of questions, as these teachers had much to learn about the art of Burmese cuisine. They then rushed back to Dhamma Jyoti in time for registration on the upcoming Satipatthana course, before undertaking a 10-day pilgrimage in Upper Burma of the lineage figures of the SN Goenka tradition. This podcast is really fun, and between the laughter, there's a lot to learn as well.
My name is Daniel Mayer, and I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, 1940. And I came to Dhamma 1974, more or less. And I first meditated in Mahayana tradition in Nepal, Kopan Monastery. But I knew that there was something missing for me to really get deeply identified with the Dhamma. And I was then inspired by two other friends who were in the monastery to come to a 10-day course on love. And that was Vipassana by SN Goenka. So from January 4th, 1975, I found my path, my way, a reason to live, la raison d'être, they say in French. And I then got a student visa as a meditator, and I was living here for 3 years. In those days, we did not get more than 7-day visa to come to India. And I continued to meditate, and I also went through nature cure and things like that. What was so nice in those days that several of our meditators would go to Burma, and for 7 days that was the visa that we got. And during a certain period I had no money, but everybody wanted to go to Burma. We thought that just coming here was enough through osmosis to become a mini Buddha. Pacheka Buddha, no, not a Pacheka Buddha. But anyway, there was a lot of superstition, I'm sure, in all of us. So because I had no money, but we were all so close to one another, friends of mine said, oh, other meditators who met, we were all meeting in the courses. They said, Daniel, come with us, don't worry, we'll pay your airline ticket. So that was the camaraderie, and that was also the bond that united us as old students who were continuously meditating in this with Guruji. I said, no, thank you very much. I accept the intention of inviting me and paying my airline, but I can't go to a country without money. So I didn't go. But always this, in the back of my mind, there was always this idea that Myanmar being the source of Dhamma, where Dhamma was maintained its purity. And then 3 years later, I went back to the West to, I don't know, maybe to develop more paramis or to keep up my trip. In those days, we were all talking of trips. While in Europe, I meditated in courses with Mr. Coleman, and Mother Sayama came. Then in India, I met Robert Hover, who came to our Goenka courses and sat for a few days next to Goenka, conducting. While Goenka was conducting, Guruji, we call him. And Ruth Dennison also came to India. We meditated together in Guruji's residence. We all stayed next door, very near in Juhu Beach, next to a tobacco factory. It smelled of tobacco, but many meditators were there. I was back in Europe, and then the word went around that anybody that wanted to come for an extended period of time to Burma, if you ordained as a monk, could come. And that was, I think, the biggest opportunity. But still in Dhamma, you need the blessing of your parents or very close people. So the parents of a very dear friend of mine, I went and I said, I would love to go to Burma. I have the money. I have the nationalities necessary. I mean, we get a passport, a visa right away. But I need somehow or other somebody's blessing or support. And they said, you better go. You have everybody's blessing. You should go. And I went. We landed in Rangoon. They picked us up. The same day, they shaved our head, changed our clothes, and we were already in monk's clothes. There was a head monk who would be our so-called mentor, I think. And they put us I don't remember if it was a bus or a tractor. It was not a tractor, but it was a camion. Camion is a lorry. And we went to Shvelagon Pagoda. For 30 days I was a monk. It was really very interesting. We only had 4 days of Anapana. Day 4th we had vipassana. And then from there on you meditated as long as you decided to stay. If you were to stay longer than 30 days, you had to register. But until 30 days, it was okay. You didn't need to do a special registration. I remember Erich Kucher. He is from Austria, and he is school teacher. And his vacation, because it was Christmas, New Year time, 1980, he had to go back to school where he was teaching. And I remember he deordained, that is to say, he changed the robes into normal clothes. And I can almost see his sadness and his grief that he had to let go of being a monk. And that was very impressive. I never really appreciated deep enough what a blessing it was and how wonderful it was to be a monk. Maybe because I was more superstitious in thinking if I'm in Burma, it'll happen without me or in spite of me or something. That was the first really experience of seeing somebody who is totally devoted to Dhamma in a way that the grief is there because you can't continue because of the circumstances, whether it was money, whether it was family obligations, whether it was so many of us had parents who were sick, we had to take care of parents, or many of us had other pending issues that we had to clear and clean up before our paramis were ready and ripe enough. I was very happy that we only had 4 days of Anapana. Very happy. I said, I never go back to Goenka. This is ridiculous. Here it's fun. Mother Sayama would come to our tables and sit with us and talk with us, make sure that we enjoyed the food. One of the experiences that I had from the days when we were a monk is on Sundays, people would come from the village. We were all standing with our bowls in rows, and the village people would come on Sundays and give us things. And I was so happy because they gave me soap and toothbrushes and other goodies. Obviously, again, you see the maturity of a student, even in spite of the robes. So I was ready to go to my room with all those gifts. And then they said, no, you pass by the meditation hall and you put everything in the meditation hall because it's for everybody. There's nothing yours, I, me, mine. A short time, but obviously too long. I was disappointed. But I had enough soap and enough toiletries and things like that. So I put it in the hall and went back to my room. We were all sleeping in one big room. There were several rooms. Uchitin would give an evening lecture, mostly from the texts of the Tikapatthana, Majjhima Sukhaya. Sayamaji would sit and put a cushion next to her, and I interpreted it as it was Sayaji Ubakin. This is visible, his energy accompanying her, a bit like Guruji in the center in Dhamma Giri in India would always have a light on, and it represented Guruji, Sayaji obviously. So this respect, I immediately took in. So in that sense, yes, there is definitely an important step that you take when you are amongst holy people, amongst honest people, sincerely meant people. And that was really the core of being a monk. We needed nothing and we really didn't expect anything. And that was, but as far as meditation is concerned, I think it really depended more on the individual, not on what we were receiving. I remember meeting many meditators who had been with us, like, for instance, Jean-Claude Sée from France. And Jean-Claude told me many times that for him, the deepest experience in his life was the year when we were monks, when we ordained. And I think he repeated that a year later as well. For me, the learning came by sitting vipassana courses with Guruji and abstaining, which freed me from guilt, which put me closer to a lifestyle which I've never regretted and I've always been grateful to have fallen into. I used to be the son of an owner in Argentina, so very wealthy. I had a Rolls Royce and a yacht, anything that money can buy. And when you are this other environment, you're really subject to others because you depend on somehow rather the intentions of being supported by others. Even if you have some money, because I wasn't a monk forever, but I stopped earning. And I must say that today I'm 80 and I'm so grateful that I did what I did. I'm so grateful to the teachers that accompanied us. And yesterday or day before when I met Uchitin's niece, because her mother and Uchitin's father were brothers, or the other way around, it was so inspiring to meet somebody my age who had sat here in Burma, from Burma, with also U Ba Khin and with Guruji, and she knew Goenka, obviously. Since she was 16, she sat here. There's nothing really, once you're in Dhamma, that you regret. Now that I'm here back after 40 years, what I remember of having been a monk is a feeling of being welcome. And that's something that I don't have in other places in the world. Myanmar, somehow or other, and that has nothing to do with me, but it's in this soil or in the people, they just welcome you. It's as if there was a silent language. You cannot purchase it. You cannot exchange it. And it's there. So I don't have to show any pedigree. So in that sense, I'm really very grateful that I could come back and I could experience this. I'm sure that being a monk means to let go of everything. And I know that that was not my intention 40 years ago. So in that sense, maybe it was premature to allow me to be a monk. And it was maybe even a lack of respect to the Buddha to allow us to be monks, to represent him without the maturity. On the other hand, I remember Guruji Goenka say, if I would have been with you guys as strict as I'm now, you would have run away. So in that sense, I'm sure that, yes, it was good that they gave us that opportunity and we owe gratitude and respect. I know that when I see a monk today, I will not just pass by and cross, but feel this sense of devotion, but not blind devotion, and that sense of admiration to give up so much. And thank you very much for letting me be here.
Thank you so much for having us. That's just a beautiful introduction into all of this. And I want to go back to the early days, something you mentioned about your upbringing in Argentina. Often when we think about the spread of Dhamma in the world, we think about it going to India, other Asian countries, and then we think of kind of a more white middle-class hippies in the West, of which your background is a little bit outside of that. And so I'd be curious to know about the circumstances of your growing up in Argentina, your family's background, the religion and spirituality of your youth, and the movement from there to the early interest in wanting something that obviously you weren't finding in your immediate youthful surroundings?
Basically, I'm convinced that it's all paramis.
Can you explain that word for people who might not know?
I think we are reborn, and there's something in French called déjà vu, which is an affinity towards certain people whom you meet for the first time and you feel very close to. And there's a rejection towards others and circumstances and also. So when I talk of there was an affinity in me from before, which is independent from my background. But what I did learn at home is that freedom was very important. So being born and raised in Argentina, because freedom was even more important than power or than even money, because I always had money, so money was never important. Then when the dictator Perón was re-elected in so he had to leave in 1955 or 53, and he was living in Spain, and then he was again brought back to Argentina in 1972, I think it was. So then I said, this is impossible. I cannot live. I was already 32 or 31, but I said, I cannot live in a country where a dictator, who I know is a dictator, will come back. So that made me leave Argentina. Now, what made me touch Dhamma was reading books like from Hermann Hesse, from Jiddu Krishnamurti, who I thought wrote exactly how I felt. I went to his center in England, near London, Brockwood, and I was able to be hosted for 4 or 5 days in his school center. And he happened to come from Saanen to that while I was there. We had lunch all together with the students. Those writers, those holy people, I remember meeting one of the students because I attended some of their classes, said to me, this is a very difficult school because all the students, you cannot punish them. So how can you keep discipline if you don't punish the students? These behavior patterns are very Dhammic, and they spoke to me. So in that sense, I think that, yes, one is led whether through books or through the inspiration of your background, your parents or...
Yeah. Right. And so then somewhere from you were in England and studying with Krishnamurti and then found your way to India. Did that happen? India happened after England?
Well, I was living in Paris, France, and I went to England, most probably as a tourist. And I went to a bookstore, and there I saw many books from Krishnamurti. It was a very special bookstore. And then I said, I spoke to the owner. And he said, yes, he lives here. And I couldn't believe that there was somebody living in my generation who was able to write as he wrote. So then I went back to the hotel. Yes, I was a tourist. And I left a note, if I don't come back in 3 days, everything is yours. Because I thought if I stayed with Krishnamurti, that was it. I didn't need any more. Because I really believed that somehow or other, if you are attracted to something and you discover it as your own truth, you don't need to look anymore. You're there. So there's no point in moving further anywhere. But yes, after 3 or 4 days, I did go back to the hotel and I went back to my lifestyle. So what brought me to India was I had a birthday party. I lived in a big apartment, 7-room apartment with 3 fireplaces in Paris. And we were all trying to be happy, but we're not, and trying to be calm, but we were only loud. And there was this one girl, she was sitting there very calm, very quietly, and I was very impressed. And I asked her, how come you're so calm, you're so quiet, you seem so tranquil? And we're trying to be, and we're just building up more tension and more aggression, although I didn't in those days identify it as aggression. And then she said, yes, I come from Nepal, where I took a 30-day course with lamas. And so I thought, oops, that's what I need. And that's what took me to Nepal. And from Nepal, I felt that because I didn't like mantras, and I didn't like prostrations. I thought that was not the path. I was happy with my life. So I think if you're happy with your life, you're looking something that coincides with that state of mind that you have.
Right. So there's been a lot more interest in this period of kind of like the hippie backpacker culture of 1960s, 1970s, encountering the Buddhist teachings and a lot of other Eastern teachings as well. And we have these amazing memoirs that have come out from people like John Coleman, Eric Lerner, Bhikkhu Yogavatara, I don't know his lay name, who described the scene at the time. And then there's this recently released documentary, From Myanmar to the World, Overland from India, documents those same years. This was back when it was all much more of an experiment of very diverse cultural moments that were coming together. And it's since led to the formation of functional meditation centers all over the West and all over the world. But those early years, those different cultural movements and peoples meeting each other in sometimes experimental and surprising ways is actually where it all came from. And I wonder if you can paint a picture of your own experience during this time and describe what that India scene was like for people who never had the chance to see it.
I don't think that I have the answer. Partly, I was never part of that hippie. I always was a son of an owner, so I always lived in certain comfort and luxury. Like Marie Antoinette used to say, oh, if they don't have bread, give them cake. So in that sense, I really didn't identify with the hippies and those people. But what I did realize is that for me, in India, things were very easy. I'll just give you an example. I sat on one of the many 10-day courses with a friend, and she was the daughter of the Consul General of Afghanistan, who later became ambassador.
Oh.
And after the course, she said, oh, come with me and let's go home. And I stayed with her in her father's home, which was the embassy or the Consul General of Afghanistan. And I stayed there for a few days. And then they drove me in their ambassador's car, diplomatic ambassador's car, to the railway station, Victoria railway station, for me to go to Pathankot, and then I would go to Dharamsala. So here I arrive in the railway station. I buy this train ticket, and all of a sudden I realize, I have 1,000 rupee bills. In those days, they were even numbered, 1,000 rupee bills. And not enough little money, short money, like 10 rupee notes or 50 rupee notes. You were very rich with 10 rupees in those days. They must have seen me behind with me coming, and then all of a sudden looking, how can I pay my ticket? And they may have helped me, or maybe I took all it was enough. And because I didn't have the train ticket, I arrived maybe 2 hours earlier. So then I got my ticket, I went to the train, sat on my seat, put my suitcase on top, and fell asleep. Now, in those days, I had my little cushion, and inside my cushion I had my passport and my money. And I sat on it. That's all what I had. And everything else was in my suitcase. While I was sleeping, they stole my suitcase. Then I wake up because the train is leaving, and I see that my suitcase isn't there. But I realize, I have my passport, I have because I always travel with one-way ticket. I have my passport and I have my money, so what? And the other people say, your suitcase isn't there. You have to go and get off the train. I said, no, if I get off the train, then I lose the train. And I want to go to Pathankot. So I decided to stay in the train. And sure enough, the train leaves. And I said, and the people in the train, in the wagon where I was, realized, yes, I wasn't there. And all of a sudden, somebody goes to the bathroom and says, hey, here's your bag. And they give me my bag. And all that was missing was just the clothes and the toiletries, which I bought for maybe 100 rupees once I got to Pathankot.
So when you were in India, was there like a popular bucket list for the travelers that were going? Like I know there was obviously there was the Goenka experience. There were also things like Osho, Maharishi, transcendental meditation. There all these probably other movements that were starting to take off that we've long since lost the memory of today. And I wonder what that scene was like for just the chatter and the interest and the places that different people were going, the experiences they were reporting. That's a scene that's now so lost in the world we have today, and yet everything today arose from that vast mixing of cultures.
That's very true. But again, I'm sure you'll be disappointed from my answers. I had found my path. So I decided, the body is still important, so I went through nature cure, and that's where I really put a lot of energy. Now, then I went to different nature cures, one of which was a Kaivalya Dhamma, yoga, hospital, and college.
What is nature cure?
Nature cure is like the body treatments through fasting and through healthy eating and through exercises. So natural living, no? But it was mostly fasting, sometimes colonics or enemas, and sometimes raw diet and yoga exercises, this and that. So I went to this Kaivalya Dhamma Yoga hospital and college where they really have very healthy food and very healthy lifestyle in Lonavala, which is between Pune and Bombay. And I remember it was also in the 70s, mid-70s. Many of those people who were doing this retreat of healthy living and yoga exercises, and they also had theory of Patanjali, who was their so-called spiritual teacher. And they said, oh, we're going to Lonavala, to Pune, because there's this guy called Osho, and he is very famous, and he's very spiritual and very whatever. And they told me many days, because I was there several weeks, and they often said, come with us, come with us. And I said, no, I'm not interested. I wasn't interested. So I wasn't curious, and I wasn't interested, and I never went. Until now, 40 years later, that through YouTube, I see a video on Osho. And I said, wow, I have nothing to do. Let's watch it.
Wild, Wild Country.
I watched it, and it's a series of 6 hours.
Yeah.
But I never knew it was 6 hours because it says 1 hour. And then after 1 hour, there's this other hour. And then there's the other hour. And then I see it's six segments of 1 hour. And I said, ridiculous. So after the second or third segment, I went to the last segment, which was 6 hours. Yeah. And then I realized, and then I went back. And so I saw that, and I said, God, am I fortunate never to have been tempted to fall into people who maybe had a different intention at some point, but who only work through samadhis, through concentration, into hypnotizing or imposing themselves or their intentions on others.
Right. And when you're young and all these things are new, it's very difficult to have any standing or background to know, well, these messages all sound very similar. It seems like they're all kind of saying the same thing in different ways. Standing back now and looking at who these teachers were and where the movements ended up, you see that they couldn't have been more different. But from the ground up, when you're in that swirl of activity, it's hard to make that distinction and differentiation.
I don't know if I fully agree. I don't know if I fully agree, because I really believe now that I've seen this Osho trip, they like the word trip, and I remember more about Krishnamurti. It's people who are not satisfied with themselves and not satisfied with the world around them. So I really think that, as you say, there were people who used or misused India, who used or misused these other so-called gurus, self-appointed gurus. And yes, they fell prey to weaknesses.
So at the time, even at the time, you feel that you saw a real distinction in the different teachers and courses.
Definitely.
Yeah. Can you expand on that? And you would also, along with that, you had mentioned before that you had already found your path. I also wanted to clarify what path did you feel that you found in India, and how was that path different than these other traditions that even on the ground, and I'm very glad you corrected me in my assumption, that even on the ground and at the time, you felt this is very, for other people, maybe there wasn't that difference that you saw, but for you, what worked for you and where you wanted to continue was extremely distinct from other teachers who were doing similar things, but something was very off that made you disinterested in looking more.
So I think there are many answers, and there are many different points that you're really taking up, and I appreciate that. As far as I'm concerned, the voice of S.N. Goenka, the honesty of S.N. Goenka, and the total commitment was enough.
That stood out.
There was, yes, for instance, in those days, I remember we had to pay 30 Indian rupees per course. And I went, and there were people who didn't have that money, and they went around and asked for the money. And when I got my money out of my room to give to them, they already had enough, and they were already inscribing themselves for the course. And I go and pay my 30 rupees, and I look at the names of the people, because I was also very curious, and I see the name S.N. Goenka, 30 rupees. So he paid, although he was a teacher, as a student to contribute to everything. I thought that was so special. Then there was a special humor. He has a sense of humor that really felt so close. And Charlie Chaplin once said, no, that you have to be also very humble if you're humorous. But it's not only humility, but also catch you with surprise, not repeat what you already know.
Right.
And we laughed so much at his discourses because they were so vivid, so true, so real. So it was not just his voice. It was not just the fact that we were looking for something, or that I was looking for something, but it was also what we saw in him. In the early days, you could go to his house in Juhu Beach at 6 o'clock in the evening and meditate at his house with him. You didn't have to do anything. You just walked in, you sat down, and that was it. And then you left. That's why we also all lived, including Ruth Dennison, very near Juhu Beach.
Yeah.
I think other teachers, although I don't know because I really wasn't so interested, but they really wanted to praise you if you were somebody that could help them.
Oh, I see.
And Goenka, he couldn't care less. He looked at you as somebody who was an orphan. And that's what we were.
And you had an initial interest in Krishnamurti, and that led, obviously, from that interest to moving on and taking the Goenkaji courses. Was there a reason or a transition that was made?
For me, Krishnamurti never stopped to be a teacher. Never stopped to be my teacher.
Right.
But what happened when I was at his center, and also with him later in Ojai, and I experienced total silence. It's very difficult to describe, but when you were there was nothing that you needed to think about. There was nothing that you had any questions about. There was just a void, a vacuum, anatta, which means no I, no me, no mine. So there was, and plus he never looked for meeting with others to continue a process. Whereas Goenka, yes, he invited you to continue a process. And then he started with Satipatthana courses, which is 7 days instead of 10 days, but only for all students, and then long course courses. So in that sense, he offered something that Krishnamurti never offered.
Right. Yeah. Can you describe the circumstances of your first Goenka course experience, what that was like, what the situation was like with the course setup and such?
I'm sure it'll disappoint you because I had no idea what it was all about.
Sure.
In those days, it was at the Mahabodhi Society, at the Burmese Vihar, and you could sit anywhere you wanted, but that seat was for the whole day. So I didn't understand why they were pushing to be the first ones in the early morning at 4:30.
So every day it would reset.
Every day you had the choice of sitting wherever you wanted.
Right.
And so most of the people really at 4:00, even almost before the gong rang, they were ready to go there.
That's one way to get people in the Dhamma hall early, huh?
Definitely, it worked.
Yeah.
And I sat in the back, and I really loved his discourses, loved his voice, and knew I was in the right place, but I cannot say what I understood. And I cannot say that I heard Guruji say at the end of the course, now you meditate every day, morning and evening. So for me, it was finished. The course was finished, and I had done nothing was pending. And only after more courses did I realize, oh, I missed something. I should have continued to meditate.
Mm-hmm. And how was the physical circumstances of those courses? Were students sharing a room? How was the food? How was the bathrooms?
So it depends where you had the course. We had it at the Burmese Vihar, where there were 2 beds per room on one side, and on the other side it's like a square. There were the women and many nuns, and I was very impressed by the fact that there were so many Catholic nuns in that course. I had a very nice Swiss young boy student from St. Gallen. So we could talk. Some people we could talk except for 3 or 4 days during the 10-day course.
I see.
But otherwise you could talk. And some of us, not me because I wasn't that, would buy chai, milk tea from the gate, but he couldn't leave the gate. So the man would come to the gate and sell you for a few cents. I really don't know what it was like for others. In Africa, now I'm conducting courses in Africa, and for instance, in Ethiopia, things are very different. On day 10, when Noble Silence ends, all Ethiopian students sit around in a circle, and each one talks about their own experience, as just like in prisons courses, they talk about their own experiences. So this was never our case. I don't think we were really social. We were really more involved in ourselves. Like, for instance, after vipassana in January, I was so impressed. But I stayed there, and then later I even rented a room and for 30 rupees a month to decide what I want. So, no, I was not interested in others, but others were not interested in me either. We were very close. Only after there was a center in Igatpuri, 1976. Then, yes, because there was a center, there was more of a brotherhood amongst us. But while there were all these non-center courses, we didn't care about others, and others didn't.
So you're saying before a center was created, when it was a non-center culture, that had an effect of not necessarily making a community or a sense of belonging.
Definitely.
Interesting.
Definitely, yes. Absolutely.
Right. And Goenkaji was teaching all these courses himself at the time?
No. When I took my course in January 1975, he was already with his wife. And his wife would accompany him and sit next to him. And it was surprising. Like, for instance, when you go, you expect the teacher to be lit and the stage to be very well lit. And there was the opposite. On day 0, as he walks in, he starts chanting. As he walks in, there were no... And the lights were very dim. So in that sense, yes, again, he was not trying to praise himself, but let the Dhamma take you, lead you.
Yeah. And then with the founding of the center in 76, I think you said it was, that brought more of a sense of community and belonging?
Much more. And also he was such a renunciate. Like, for instance, first we would have, in the early days, when the center was already created, he would have the direction towards one side, and then after that, he turned it to the other side, east-west. So all of a sudden then he immediately, after 2 or 3 courses, he gave a 30-day course there. So as not to deprive others, it was parallel. In the same hall, we had the 10-day students sitting on one side and the 30-day students underneath, below. And the discourses were different. And his room was very, like next to the garden, very minimal. It was really... And that's when Robert Hoover came to visit him. And it was very impressive.
And I think what's hard to appreciate in this time, looking back on that, is that now that we have such a format for centers and administration and protocol and appointments and everything else, you just kind of walk in and things are already moving. There's already a roadmap. But the thing that I think is so remarkable and that you have to put yourself back at the time is there was no roadmap for what he was doing. Of course, Sayagyi Ubakin was doing his thing at IMC, so he had that kind of inspiration and support. But for what he was trying to create, where he was trying to create it, who he was creating it for, it was really, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this vast experiment of let's put it together in this way, let's see how it works. And I think the courage and the risk of failure and criticism and the unknowing, I think it's really important to put yourself back there in that time and just kind of see how scary it was and see how what incredible risks and courage it took for him to try this thing that had never been done. And maybe he didn't do everything perfectly, but it's so easy to try something and then to have someone standing back say, well, you look at this and look at this. But at the moment of doing it, you're putting yourself out there in such a vulnerable way to do something you care about and just seeing what happens.
Exactly. And I have many instances that prove what you are just saying. For instance, it was 9:30 p.m. I was in my bed and I just had to go out for, I don't know what reason, or they called me. And I was in my pajamas. And they tell me, Daniel, come. You have to see Guruji right away. I said, but I'm in my pajamas. At least let me get dressed. No, you come. I says, you're covered. This is enough. Right. So here they take me to Guruji's residence. And there was a lady speaking Spanish whose English was very, very weak. And she was complaining to Goenka that he is so demanding, that for him everything has to be perfect, but for us, for her as a student, she is giving a cot and no comfort whatsoever. And what type of a teacher is he that lives in such luxury, whereas she as a student has nothing? So here they call me and I'm supposed to translate. And Guruji is there sitting with his smile and so much metta, so much love and kindness. So all of a sudden I sit there and there's a blank in my mind. I cannot think at all. All my thought patterns are stopped as if I weren't me. And all I could hear was her voice and his voice. It was something that really struck me, and I'm still so much impressed with what happened, how it was possible that through his concentration, now that I know a bit more, or through however the environment, and that something could be stopped so much, so brusquely. And I translated, and I remember what I translated, and it was that she was complaining, and she was showing the carpet that she was sitting on. And Guruji said to her, but this carpet was given so that you sit comfortably, not for me. And he had so much patience, no matter what the complaints were, no matter what the commentaries were. He had so much patience in really making the students understand that it's not for him, and he is not there for himself, but he is there for us. I remember another instance where we really wanted chai, which is this Indian tea with milk,
Right.
especially at 12 o'clock after lunch. And the cook, Mahavir, would say, no, we don't have enough money. No chai, milk is too expensive. It was very early days. The tea was cheap, but the milk was not. And we really wanted it, and we had very good teachers now, like Dr. Joe Poland, and he would represent us all and go to Goenka and say, Goenka, you have to talk to your cook because they don't want to give us chai.
I mean, a students' union.
Exactly. It's a students' union. And Guruji would talk to Mahavir, tell him, give them chai. Okay, tomorrow, but only tomorrow. And then again, 2 days later, no more chai. And like this. So, yes. I don't know if it answers a bit.
Yeah, right. And, because I think now that these centers are all set up and everything looks like they just run so fluid, of course, there's problems, but nothing in terms of the experimental nature of the older days. And also, I think the way, as a student, one hears the narrative, there could be this sense of fate or destiny. The Dhamma has to spread. Everyone is just a recipient in making it so. And I think that leaves out the dynamic quality of what it took to implement. I don't even want to say a system because it's a system now. It wasn't a system then. But when you kind of subconsciously think about it as a state of passivity where everyone's just playing their roles in something that has to happen, with that mindset, then you leave out this dynamic, courageous, scary environment where you're trying things and seeing what works, and you're adjusting, and you don't know what's going to happen. And we see where it came to today. But one of the features of looking back on history is that when you look at those moments, the thing is we know how they turned out. So because we know how they turned out, we can read into that knowledge. But if you put yourself back in those moments, not knowing how it's going to turn out, then things take on a different shade.
Absolutely. And I think this is really I don't know if the word is problem, but because Guruji worked according to the needs, there was also a certain apparent contradiction, because he would say, according to the situation, something that would not relate to another situation somewhere else.
Sure.
So in that sense, I think this uniformity that has been evolving is sometimes too strict. It should be more like the Japanese say of a bamboo, no? The bamboos that you can really be more flexible. And in that sense, I fear that if the seniors don't allow the more juniors to understand the need to be more open-minded and not so strict, to understand just like there are customs that Goenka used to say when we began spreading the Dhamma in other countries. Find a place where you're comfortable inviting your mother to a center, to a course. So for me, it was very obvious. If my mother were Swiss and she has to go out to the toilet like we had in Cuba in the bushes, she would be really very uncomfortable. But if my mother is Cuban and in the bushes there's a hole and there's a sign, women only, she would go sit on a hole, and they call it plops toilet. Plops because it makes a ploops, that noise.
Right.
So I think Goenkaji knew very well the situation. And although he didn't know where Latin America maybe was in the map, he did have information from the students, or was open enough to find out, so as to give us little flexibility.
Right.
And this, I think, is maybe now because they want to follow the rules in some areas not working properly. I don't know.
Right. But this is also just the feature of any movement that grows from being a flexible, teacher-student relationship into something that has to be more and more people want benefit. What are you going to do? There has to be something codified. But as soon as it gets codified, then you run into these other issues. But I'm also curious, you said that there were situations that he responded to at the time that were very much a result of the time and place and context, which now those certain decisions that he made have been carried over into a wider ranging kind of administrative form. And correct me if I'm misinterpreting that, but I'm wondering if there's some examples you could give of that.
I think one of the examples is, as far as comfort is concerned, I am sure that the centers in Europe are built with a demand that is not applicable for potential future centers in Africa or even in Latin America. So in that sense, I think it's wonderful for Europeans to have what they're used to, but it should not mean that the poor people in South America or even in Africa or in other poorer countries. Myanmar is also a poor country, only that Dhamma is so strong that they don't care not to give all their money so that their center has more than their own home. But most people would say, no, first comes my home and then the center.
Right.
So in that sense, I think, yes, I just heard that their budget for a potential center in Austria is exorbitant compared to the type of country, the population, and the availability of money. So I think if they looked at the maps that, how Goenka started, and we would buy buckets when we would go to Igatpuri to the courses, and we would leave the buckets, and those same buckets lasted until the next year when we came and bought new buckets.
Buckets for shower, or
yes. And there were the bathrooms. It was just a room, and underneath was WC, the bathroom, and above was a shower. So Goenka made sure that the sewage from the WC goes to where there is water, so that the animals and the microbes don't die. Whereas the water from the shower doesn't matter; it has soap, and there's no living being. This type of consideration is fantastic. So the respect of life, but we didn't mind going with our bucket of water into the shower, but nowadays, there's not enough pressure.
Right. So there's a focus or an attention to luxury and comfort. Yeah.
Sometimes excessive, I think. In
Right.
my opinion.
And contrasting that looser, less structured course experience from before with more of the formal administration and protocol of meditation centers today, and having experienced both, what would you say are the respective advantages of each style?
The generations have changed. We are living now with internet, with immediate gratification of any information. You don't even need to go to school anymore. You just can find out whatever you need to know. And I remember in my profession, some patients came to see me and they knew more of their disease than I. And I was supposed to be their doctor. So it was no longer embarrassing because I knew where their information came from. But when you look at it globally, it doesn't really matter because you see the body as a whole and not the symptom or the little part of it. But yes, I think that it's very difficult to compare then with now. And I hope that the newer generations continue to satisfy their needs and understand what are their real needs, not their apparent needs. You know, it's a bit like a friend of mine told me not long ago how things are blown up. Certain things are blown up in comparison to from a different perspective. So in that sense,
Sure. Are there from your course experience back in the early days of India and kind of seeing that more flexible kind of going with the flow experimental attitude and seeing the way that the course structures are now, do you think is there something from those earlier days, some aspect that you think has been lost or minimized or?
No, I think you need what you have now. And in those days, like Goenka said, you couldn't have had it because it would have been impossible.
Yeah.
As far as, for me, as long as those who are in a role of guiding, of inspiring, and of leading, as long as they meditate, then things will clear up and wash away, and they will really act according to the real needs. But if those people that are leading, those so-called appointed teachers, or not necessarily those appointed supervisors, those appointed managers, because a manager in a course is like a secretary. Sometimes she knows more than the boss.
Sure, yeah.
And a secretary can really make things happen. And in that sense, a manager or somebody in that responsibility, as long as they all meditate, and then things will flow okay.
Right. Is there any concern of that?
Wow. Well, I don't know about others, but I know that for me, internet takes up so much time that I prefer not to read them. So I have hundreds of emails unread because I have to be very selective.
Sure.
So if a teacher or a manager feels the responsibility is to be informed and then act, instead of letting yourself be guided by your own feelings and instincts and let things fall into place, then yes, the day might not be long enough.
Right. So you're talking about a balance between proper information and informing yourself with having the meditative process inside and self-knowledge.
And trusting that your intuition is okay and letting things happen.
Right. So that's a difficult balance that, especially in the modern age, people have to figure out. Yeah, I see. Going back to your years in Burma when you first arrived, you came in 1980, was it?
Yes. To Burma was exactly between December 79 and January, February 1980.
Right. And you haven't been back since until today?
I have not been back since.
That's
until
extraordinary.
Day before yesterday.
Well, any reason?
I have no idea. But I think about it. Tonight's meditation, I think why it took me so long. But I do remember that it's not the first time that I let so much time and so much space between two very important episodes in my life. I graduated from high school, and for maybe 10 years, I dreamt repetitiously that I went back to school. But the circumstances were not there. As a son of an owner and this and that, and money and whatever. So it took all those years to again go back and learn something. So in that sense, I think it's a repetition. Why did it take me so long to go to a place like Burma? And why did it take so long to go back to school and study a profession?
Right.
And after studying, I went to Japan to learn to practice another tool in my profession, which was acupuncture. And I went as a trainee in the home of an acupuncturist, I think he's American-born, married to a Japanese, Ron Kelly, I think was his name. And he moved later to the UK. And I could live at his home. There were certain conditions, almost like a monk. And I stayed at his home, and I went down to his clinic where he had several beds. And for the first week, my tears were falling. And I was standing behind him. I don't know if that's interesting for anybody, but anyway, my tears were falling because I felt, I found this profession.
Acupuncture.
Yes.
Right.
So a bit like, that's why I didn't maybe.
Sure.
And now I'm so happy to be here. And tomorrow tonight I'm sitting at Satya.
Yeah, and that's why we also appreciate you making time for this. But when you came to Burma, what were the circumstances that brought you? Was it Goenkaji's encouragement?
No. The only thing is the opportunity to be where you knew there was a source. Because we knew that Sayagyi U Ba Khin was a teacher of Goenka. And we knew that Sayagyi U Ba Khin's teacher was Sayatechi. And we knew that it all came from Ledi Sayadaw. And this lineage we knew it. We didn't have to find out. And the fact that we can also be monks without having to renounce to what we have.
So that was an invitation from IMC that somehow reached you in India. You can come, you can stay at the center.
No, it didn't reach India. It reached the West. I was living in Paris, France.
See. Okay.
And everybody that had sat courses or was sitting courses with Goenka, Goenka and Shama, they were all together. And Coleman and everything. And they all knew me, and I knew them because I translated the 10-day discourses into Spanish in 1979. And the translation was so bad that the Spaniards say, "Oh, wait a minute, we have to do it again." And Coleman had given me, because they were using Goenka's material in those days. And the Spaniards said, no, please, now we cannot wait anymore. And they retranslate. I use terrible words. I bought a very big, expensive dictionary thinking that was the right way to do it. And I used for mind, espiritu, which is spirit. Spirit and mind are just not even correlated.
Right. Yeah, so then that was redone another time.
Many times.
Yeah. And concerning your ordination, what was that experience like? What was it like to wear the robes for that period?
So the first thing that surprised me was they had to shave our head. Not that I was so proud of my little hair, but it really was mine, and they were taking it away. Then, as far as clothes is concerned, it wasn't a big deal because we were all men. There were no women. But they were the wives of those that were, or the friends, lady friends that were accompanying them. And so they showed me how to wear the robes. And then we were all in a big room. And then I saw this one man our friend, and his wife was next to him, and he had already put on his robe, and he was pulling his underwear down and let it on the floor. And she, as his wife, took his underwear and walked away. And that surprised me very much. It really it made an impact. To wear the robes in themselves gave me a feeling of protection, but not a feeling of being a Buddhist. I'm sure I wore underwear, but I can't promise.
Yeah. Did that have an impact on your practice or your...
The underwear?
No.
You filter it, don't worry. To tell you the truth, I don't think the emphasis was so much on the practice.
During your monkhood, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes. The emphasis was much more on letting us know about Dhamma.
Right.
And Mother Sayama was really very concerned that we enjoyed our meals. They were very conscientious of the fact that on Sundays the people from town were coming and they would see us. We were all foreigners and we represented the Dhamma or the Buddha. I don't remember really being very inspired by the Uchitin would read from the different, there are different books, the Tipitaka, the Tipitaka, it's the 3 different books. And I had already read the Dhammapada, so it's not that it was all so different. Reading it was very different to hearing Goenka's discourses, for instance.
Sure.
Because Goenka talks out of life. And the books were talking in a very repetitive way about shoulds and shouldn'ts and something that was much more elevated than where at least I was.
And did Sayama not give discourses?
No, it was only Chuchitin.
Right.
But Sayama was always there.
Right. And this act of ordaining, is this something you would recommend to meditators who wanted to become much more serious today?
Wow. You see, it's a very individual thing. If they want to become religious, I would say don't do it in that way. Goenkaji always felt that the world had not yet matured into supporting the Sangha, which is the order of monks. It will happen, it will come, but it's not yet there. And if individuals feel that this will put them closer to enlightenment, I would say don't, because nobody knows what is enlightenment anyway. So if they really want to discipline themselves, they don't have to become monks for that. You don't need a label.
Right.
And today I can say in so many years that I have been practicing vipassana, I have really, without being a monk, been able to observe my cravings and developments on desires in a way that they don't bother me anymore. So if I really, I was just wanting sweets, cakes or cheese or things like that. Nowadays, I can do without, but I can also enjoy having it. And so in that sense, those sensations that used to overpower me and take me away, now, without having been a monk, but having continued the meditation, have really, without suppressing them and without denying them. I still, and also, for instance, in business, it's very difficult in certain countries and certain professions not to maintain your sila, your morality. You have to either bribe or give something different to what you say you're giving, or try to overpower somebody else who also has the same right like you have. So that was the first thing that I decided I don't want to do anyways. I don't want to go back to business because it's very difficult. So in that sense, if somebody feels they cannot live in society unless they live in a monastery, it's different.
Right.
But if you can live as a lay person, I would recommend that for the time being.
Right. For what role would monastics have in the Vipassana structure today as taught by S.N. Goenka? Is it recommended that this is more of a lay tradition, or if there's someone who wants to be a monastic and wants to live as a monk but continue with courses and long courses and other kinds of service?
I think Goenka is very clear. His approach is for lay people.
Okay.
He has all respect to the monastic world. He always tries to take advantage and give Dhamma Sangha, Sangha Dana, it's called. Sangha is the order of monks and Dana is generosity. So you can see videos of him giving food to monks.
Sure, I've seen it myself at his family home before he passed. Yeah.
Exactly. So definitely, but for him, the most important thing is the way his approach is towards lay people.
Right. So you're presently in charge of Africa, the whole...
Dhamma is in charge.
Okay. Right.
Fortunately, I'm out of it. And that's why I didn't even post in my email address that I won't return any emails for the next 7 days.
Right. I believe you were initially played a central role in opening up a lot of the Dhamma courses that came to Latin America. Is that correct? In South America?
Right.
Yeah.
That is correct. Every country in South and Central America has had courses. We have many, many centers with 30-day courses and 20-day courses. And Arthur Nichols and myself, both of us, we really were able to be instrumental in letting those people who were mature in Dhamma take Dhamma.
Right. And I'm curious in the sense that your early experiences in courses were at these non-centers that were more, less controlled, more wild. And it sounds like in a lot of your teaching and conducting career, you've gone in and established courses similarly to what was happening in India in grounds that had never really hosted something like that before. So operating under far less than the optimal circumstances and having to deal with unpredictable and confusing situations that might come. So I wonder if you've sensed a similarity between those early days in India and all over Africa and South and Latin America, the diversity and unpredictability of situations that you've brought these courses into.
I think there is a magic in the courses, which is independent from those people who are helping organize them. What was very clear is that the first course in 1994 in Venezuela attracted several people. Before 1994, John Coleman came to South America and organized a 10-day course with Miguel Vegas. And it never followed, there was never a follow-up after that. But in the first course that the Goenka tradition conducted by Arthur Nichols had in Venezuela, people from many other Latin American countries came. So they were Brazilians, they were Argentinians, and they came and then we had a course in Brazil and Argentina, and then people from Chile were in that course, and they said, oh, we want it in Chile, and so we went to Chile, and then from Chile, some people from Bolivia. So it was like a chain reaction. I always call it like bowling. If you know how to play bowling and the right ball, the right stick falls, the others follow.
Right.
I think what happened with Guruji was a bit different in the sense that the people were admiring Goenka and they were devoted to Goenka and they did it for Goenka. Whereas the people in Latin America who sat the courses, they had an experience that was so overwhelming and so convincing that the experience themselves made them want to follow up and continue and bring it back. And I remember Arthur Nichols once telling me, it's so interesting that these students from neighboring countries, they don't give any donation, but they go to their country and they organize a course.
Right.
Which in a certain way, from a certain point of view, you can say, wait a minute, we paid so much money for this course. It costed us. And here they took it, but they don't contribute. But they contributed much more by bringing the Dhamma to their country. So in that sense, it was different to India.
Right. People give in different ways. And it's also interesting, this being a podcast that is talking about Myanmar specifically. I think what's interesting for people to consider are those kind of elements within the course structure that are coming from Burma, things that one might not even think of, the gongs. As far as I understand, the gongs of every Vipassana course in the world, in any place, are Burmese gongs. I've carried out. I've helped different centers and non-centers organize, buying and shipping and milling gongs, but that's that's a staple that comes here from Myanmar, a cultural element. There was actually earlier in Myanmar, much earlier when in my life here, I gave a talk on meditators around the world being grateful to the country, kind of wanting to tell the people, these are things about your country that's traveled that you might not know. The gong was one example I gave. Little did I know there was a reporter sitting in the audience who wrote an article about me and the talk in a Myanmar newspaper, all centered about the gong. And he had actually an artist drew a picture of a hairy foreigner sitting with a lungji and a big gong behind him, sharing and celebrating that, look, this Burmese gong has been around the world. Of course, there's other elements too. There's the pagoda, which is now coming to be built at a lot of centers, permanent places. There's the knowledge about the lineage of teachers and kind of Burmese history that is also being shared. And I wonder, in your experience, what it's like to be in these places that, when you talk about the spread of spiritual teachings or other things around the world, you, especially in Africa and South America, have been to places and reached people that, not to put too dramatic of a point on it, but that in human history, the Buddhist teachings have rarely reached some of the pockets which you've taken them to. And that's a really exciting thing. And not just taking these Buddhist teachings of liberation, but also some of these elements of Burmese culture that one might not even realize if you don't know Burmese culture and Burmese Buddhist culture intrinsically, that this element is actually from here. So I'm curious about that experience as well.
For instance, very important for us is following the relics of the Buddha that you in Burma have in the Sri Lankan pagoda, and Goenka put the relics also at the global pagoda. We now have not the relics of the Buddha, but we put crystals, and crystals are supposed to attract also. So again, this comes from Burma. We just don't have the relics, but we have the crystals. And in Brazil, crystals are also very valuable, and they attract so much. Some of the historians say that you can put in a crystal the whole history of a civilization.
Right.
So Burma has contributed very much. I have been, through other people that I have met, in contact with Vietnamese people and a Vietnamese master, and who had quite an important gathering around him of both people who had migrated and lived in America. And because he was also a patient, and I had a very close connection with him. And when he heard that I was doing a technique given by Lady Sayadaw, he said, "No, he is my teacher." His technique is totally different. I don't want to confuse people in your group and in your podcast. So I won't go into details of what he was teaching and this and that, but he was like a spiritual teacher for that group of Vietnamese, which was international. For them, they were followers of Lady Sayadaw.
Right.
Now, he never heard of Sayatechi, he never heard of U Ba Khin, but yes, Lady Sayadaw. So Burma has always been in many circles amongst the emigres in other countries and among locals in other countries. Very important. So it's definitely one of the mothers of Dhamma.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you think about how closed the country has been, and I think this kind of not knowing this or knowing this information, it gives you a deeper appreciation of despite some of the closed aspects of the country, this is not to say this profound influence, of the highest aspect in terms of spiritual teachings, and then in terms of some smaller things, just like gongs or lungjis or knowledge that it also provides. So just a last...
I don't know if I can agree with lungis, because one of the things that they told me in Texas when I went there is be sure not to wear a lungi.
I've been told that there too, I think. I've been told that as a student, I can wear what I like, but as a server or something else, I have to be a little careful of what I represent. But, right. So a last question. I understand from your talk, you spent time with, obviously with Goenka and Mataji, with John Coleman, with Robert Hover, with Sayama, with Uchit Tin. I'm curious about your personal experience with some of these people, about how they were different, about the personalities that you experienced, who they were as teachers, as peoples, as friends.
I think we owe them so much that to talk about that would be disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's only gratitude and appreciation. But definitely there was an enormous difference between the approach of a John Coleman, who was your buddy, really very American.
How so?
Very open-minded. And he had no qualms in saying exactly what came into his mind.
Right. Yeah, former CIA guy.
Yes. I remember one day in a course that he was conducting, it was Vipassana Day, and he said, well, I'm sorry, I just got a call from the school of my children, and their children are having a problem, so I have to go to their school, talk to the director or headmaster or something, and then he came back. This would be inconceivable in others. Also, I sat with John Coleman in Japan, and it was so informal, but it was Dhamma. With Mother Sayama, definitely, she had a very selective way of approaching the students. Mm-hmm. And I think the selection happened because through her concentration, she was able to see where certain people stood in Dhamma.
Right.
A bit like some people can identify money. And I remember my mother telling me that she went to she took a flight somewhere, and this guy who was carrying her luggage took her directly to first class. And she asked, how come? He said, well, we can see that you're a first-class passenger, somehow or other. You know? Yeah. And she wore simple clothes. It was nothing. So, yes, there's a language that Mother Sayama could read in other people. And maybe that's why she ignored me. And Robert Hover, I always tried to meet these people. So while I was working in Los Angeles, California, I had a patient, and I sent him. I said, no, I cannot help you, but you have to go and see Mr. Hover in San Diego. He might have a solution, because Mr. Hover was also working as a psychologist. Mm-hmm. And so he went to San Diego to see Mr. Hover as a patient, and then he came back to report everything the doctor saw. And then Mr. Hover came to LA, and he contacted me, and I met him. And our meter was more professional, not Dhamma. Mm-hmm. And then he explained a bit that he never charges people money, although he is a professional. And so such transparency, you know. And Ruth Dennison, she was such a sweet lady. She was like a mother to everybody, you know. She was very spontaneous. And so you would never think she's German in that sense.
Right.
She was also more tiny and like typical of people who have no inferiority complex or superiority complex, which it could be the same, and who are very natural. She saw me because I had come from the Tibetans, Mahayana in Nepal, and I still had this string, which actually was never put by a lama, because, again, my karma was that when the initiation, day of the initiation, last day, I didn't know there was initiation, so I left. And then when I came back, they told me, oh, you missed the initiation, but don't worry, I'll put your string. So this other friend put the string. And Ruth Dennison took her scissors. She says, Daniel, you're no student now, you can't wear the string. Right. So she took her scissors and cut it out in the airport in So these type of people you don't meet in the street or in
No,
business.
right. Yeah.
So there's something very special, you know. So
Yeah.
I remember even through Krishnamurti, I didn't know what to tell him, but I needed to tell him something. I was living there in his house, and so I went and I said, "I've read your books in Spanish. The translation is very well done."
Mm.
And he smiled. I don't know that he really cares if the translation is well done or not well done, you know, but somehow or other, in that sense, and I think what you're doing also with letting the world know through this new technology of what Dhamma really offers. And there's no label, there's no age, there is no sex, there is only a certain spontaneous transparency.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine once said, you can't know right if you don't do wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But in Dhamma, there is no wrong. It's a win-win situation. And in that sense, we all wish, may all beings be happy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Is there any last thing I didn't ask that you'd like to talk about?
You said we had lunch?
Yes, we'll have lunch now. Yeah.
Let's go!
Okay. We want to present a special opportunity for donors who are committed to the life of our show. While we greatly appreciate donations of any and every size, larger donations are particularly helpful. For that reason, we are encouraging donors with means to consider sponsoring a full episode for a one-time donation of $350 or more. Donations in this category can include a dedication, if you'd like, to family members or Dhamma friends, a Dhamma quotation by the Buddha or meditation teacher, even a short phone interview we can include in the episode, allowing your voice to be heard. Or your generous donation can be anonymous. Should you wish to keep your name private, the choice is yours. In any case, such a generous donation would also give you the satisfaction of knowing that you enabled at least one more episode to be produced for the benefit of all the other listeners on the path. If you would like to support our mission, we welcome your contribution. You may give via Patreon at patreon.com/Insight Myanmar, via PayPal at paypal.me/Insight Myanmar, or by credit card by going to insightmyanmar.org/donation. In all cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you are in Myanmar and would like to give a cash donation, please feel free to get in touch with us. You may want to reflect a little more deeply on some of the themes explored in the last discussion. Following every interview, my friend Zach Hessler and I take some time to process the depth of what was said. Zach has been to Myanmar on numerous occasions and spent 3 years here as a forest monk, and so we hope that our talk can add depth and context to the interview. He's now living in rural Thailand, and I'll just make a quick call on Skype to connect with him now. Hey, Zach, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, how are you going? Any more baby elephants this week?
No teenagers or babies. Yeah, nothing quite so exciting. We did get another visit, but I didn't see them.
Well, I guess that's a good thing then.
How about on your end?
On my end, not much. It's been a pretty calm week. The air pollution is really no fun here, trying to figure out what to do with that. But the weather's heating up just a little bit day by day as we're moving slowly into the hot season here.
This is supposed to be cold season here, but it's actually pretty hot in the daytime already, unfortunately.
Yeah. So it goes living in this part of the world. Great. So about the interview that we just heard, a lot of really good stuff in there. Perhaps not surprisingly, Krishnamurti's a theme that runs. We just listened to Alan Clements last week, and Alan Clements' big turning point was finding a Mahasi book in a Palm Beach, Florida bookshop here. It's a Krishnamurti book in a Paris bookshop, which plays a big role in Daniel's life. And I also noticed, we've had 3 of the 4 podcasts we've done so far have been foreigners, and all 3 foreigners have just expressed this sense of how welcomed they felt in Myanmar from the very first time they've come. Just this real sense of welcoming that even being international travelers, they haven't necessarily felt in other places.
Yes, I think it's interesting just how people come to the Dhamma in general, and how it's just based on different conditions, and running into a book here or talking to a person there. It could be, there's just so many ways that we come in, and so one little difference here and there can totally change the trajectory of what happens.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that's actually where I wanted to go with one of my next points. My ears really perked up when I was hearing Daniel talk about his timeline, because I had this feeling that as he was describing his years in Paris, that it might have intersected with my mom's years in Paris when she was there. It was a very formative time in her life. She was a member of the hippie generation and was an expat there. And those were really formative years of her character building and the friends that she made, the community she made living abroad. And I checked in with her, and actually it wasn't just somewhat in the same ballpark. It was exact. She was exactly there from 1972 until the few years following. So that was, I've confirmed that a bit after the interview, and that kind of sent my mind spinning of hearing all the stories I was hearing from Daniel were intersecting with the stories I had heard growing up about my mom's life and community in Paris as well. So that was kind of neat. It was interesting to think of these 2 expats living in Paris at the same time, and thinking that there could have been some mutual friends, or when you're living in the same place and it's a small community, there's definitely some intersections that happened. What was interesting was that when Daniel describes what brought him to Nepal, and it was the Krishnamurti book definitely sparked a spiritual interest, but then it was that girl who had done the Tibetan course, and he wanted to go try that. So where Daniel went east, my mom and her crowd ended up going south to Morocco and sub-Saharan Africa. And she had mentioned, when I talked to her about this interview and checked in with her, she's like, yeah, I knew people in my community, people I was familiar with were making that trip east. We just, once it got kind of cool and the weather got kind of cold, and we thought to warm up, and we thought south was the place to go. And so that was just kind of an interesting thing to think about. Of you had mentioned how one book in an opportune place can change so much, as we saw with the Mahasi book doing this, or another book doing that. And just meeting the right person in the right place sets you on a course of events where you go east instead of south, and then everything that happens after that can cause a series of dynamic changes as a result.
Yeah, it's amazing. What strikes me immediately is if the weather had been different, it had been a different season, that when they decided to go, your mom could have easily been swept to the east, and her whole life would be different.
Right, sure. And I probably wouldn't be here. So, as it, right. So I have a lot to be thankful for. As it was, when I was talking to my mom about this, she was mentioning that, I would have really liked to have done a course then. It would have been really good for my life to have done it at that young age. Eventually, as because, we served and sat courses together in Colorado, where my mom was as well, and your mom has also been involved. She definitely found her way there. So she got there eventually through having to have a son first, who had to go to Asia and find it himself, and then bring it back to her. So everything comes around. But it's also just an interesting thing to think about. Here's someone who was very liberal minded, and a progressive crowd, open to these kind of experiences, to wanting to learn more about herself and change in these positive ways. So very, very receptive to these kinds of teachings and practice. And yet, and was literally in the same time and the same place as this other person who through another series of events, went and, one thing, boom, his whole life has been just one dedication of Dhamma service. So it's just kind of interesting how much we're affected by these conditions, even if we have a lot of the building blocks to be receptive towards a certain practice or thing, that whether it's positive or negative, and how much the conditions of the time can affect whether you go left or right, and then everything that follows.
Yeah, that's almost it's almost too much for the mind to hold. All the there are people. Some people believe in parallel universes where all of those possibilities all happen at the same time. But that's another topic for another day, perhaps.
The final thought in this that I just found interesting is just kind of what we know about communities in general. At that time, in the 1970s, there was a lot of the world that wasn't open. A lot of China and the former Soviet Union, places that you just couldn't meet people from, and they didn't travel. So in some ways, the world was much smaller. Although today we have instant messaging and we can be in touch with anyone at any time, even people that we don't know. My mom contrasts her time in Paris as, she made, I think, one call home the whole time she was away. And when there was, of course, no email or anything, when they wanted to receive mail, their families would just send letters to general delivery at various post offices throughout Europe. So in some ways, you think of us being better connected today because of what technology is doing in making the world smaller. And yet there's also this alienation that even with all these connections, that there's not that sense of community and belonging. And that really stands out when I talk to my mom or to Daniel, people that have that were in this early meditative movement, people that were in the hippie movement even. You do hear a lot about this sense of community that they felt at the time. And that is interesting to reflect on, that sense of community they had, even though our connection today is maybe 100 times beyond that, but we don't feel that same community going through life at times.
Yeah, that just reminds me of traveling. I kind of caught the tail end of that same period where, you could call home or you'd get the poste restante general delivery like you're talking about. There was a sense of, it was more conducive to serendipitous travel where you just kind of let things happen. And so you let that conditionality unfold. And so what I notice with our connectivity now is there's a sense of control in it. Of course, that's just a different condition, right? But it has different outcomes. But that small world, we think the world's smaller now because of the connectivity, but the smallness of that world was actually happening through serendipity and running randomly into people. And it was kind of a magical type of small world. And that is still, of course, possible anytime, anywhere. And yet with the possibility to do otherwise, to kind of control and to plan, that doesn't seem to happen as much. Mm-hmm. I think there's a bit of a loss in that somewhere. So anyways, that's just me waxing romantically about days gone by.
Yeah, easy to fall into. Definitely easy to fall into. The world is changing fast.
Right. Well, I had some thoughts on the talk as well. Mostly around Daniel talking about his time as a monastic. And one thing that can be controversial is whether a monk, someone should become a monk that doesn't intend to do it for life or for any other reason than doing it for life, like temporary, or in his case, to get a visa and then to be able to meditate for longer than he would be if he was a lay person. And to be honest, my personal opinion is that, well, for one, it's very welcomed actually in Thailand and Myanmar, for example. People will ordain just for a water festival, that 7-day period of time during the holidays. And I think there's a great benefit in it. And I think surely for him, being able to stay in Myanmar and meditate continuously for a month rather than just a week is, I think it's worthwhile. And I think it's a good use of the opportunity. But not everyone would agree with that. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many questions foreigners have about the monkhood. I remember one time I had been at monasteries for a long time, and I went to meet this British foreigner living in Myanmar, didn't really know anything about Dhamma practice or whatnot. He was a friend from another field. And he said, I sat down at the table. We were meeting at a restaurant, and he said, "So Joah, tell me everything about this practice that you're doing. I really want to know." And then he kind of squinted his eyes and looked at me, and he said, "Are you a monk now?" And I was just baffled. I didn't know how to respond. I mean, he didn't even know that, like, I said, "Well, look at the clothes I'm wearing. Look at my hair." Like, no, I'm not. He was living in Myanmar, but even that level of just not knowing what we would call basic things. And for many, like the idea that you can or can't do temporary ordination, that's a real question. So I think that's something good to get out there.
Right. Daniel had mentioned it possibly even being disrespectful to the Buddha. That was more on a personal level. He said perhaps he actually wasn't truly ready yet. But I actually don't. I don't think it's disrespectful, to be honest. I think being disrespectful is to use the ropes for something nefarious, something with another intention of greed or aversion, towards something very selfish or something like that, like becoming a monk to get a special visa just so you can live there and not even practice, So
right,
or getting into a country and then through monkhood and then disrobing and getting to work there illegally or something like that. Sure, but to meditate for a month, yeah, for me personally, no problem. I think it's great.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed his honest reflection of the monkhood. He readily admits that he might not have been ready for it. He suggests that he might not have had the maturity necessary in order to wear the robes, in terms of not wanting to lose his hair, being excited when requisites were given to him by supporters, and also notes that this friend he had, Jean-Claude, was really enjoyed his time in robes and got a lot out of it. But for Daniel, there wasn't a huge difference in observing craving and other defilements in his practice with whether he wore robes or lay clothes, and underscored also that the tradition that he's involved in, that it is more of a lay tradition. And I did appreciate that honesty in terms of how it affected him.
Right. I agree. I appreciate the honesty, and certainly from within his conditions and within his experience, his what would you say? His evaluation of the whole thing, not only for himself but for others, is it makes sense. I do think, though, that there is some pieces missing there, and partly it is because of how he went into being a monk. He went in to do that retreat, essentially, not for a longer period of time, so to speak. And so I do think there are experiences a lot of Westerners have, a lot of people that ordain have, that make it very worthwhile. So his conclusion, that he did conclude, if I'm not mistaken, that really for people that, for example, have a hard time maintaining sila because of their work or some kind of situation like that, perhaps such a person would be better off being a monk. But otherwise, he didn't seem to see there was any kind of strong benefit. You could get just as much out of being a layperson. He did say, and I agree with this part, that it totally depends on the person and the situation. I would just say that there's a lot more reasons that the Buddha set this field up, these conditions, that it's really like he set up this really rich garden that's full of really fertile soil that people can take root in. And I don't think that's necessarily the right soil for everyone, but I think there's a lot more people, even today, even with all the shortcomings that might be there in the monastic system, there's still that opportunity. And I think if you enter into that garden in a different way, like his friend did. I would point to his friend Jean-Claude, as he said, that really did take root, and he was so sad when he had to disrobe. So,
right.
So I invite anyone that has the inkling, that has the intention, and has the curiosity to give it a try.
Well, one thing I'd ask you is, because obviously you were a monk twice, you ordained twice, once for 3 years at a stretch, and you put a lot of thought into where and how you wanted to be a monk. And one of the things you said just now was, I don't remember the exact way you said it, but it was something about how there's different supportive environments you can go into being a monk that will have a different effect. And you highlighted that Daniel had ordained to do this extended meditative experience in robes, but there are different ways to structure your time in your monkhood. I think that topic that you're getting into is something that would be very valuable for meditators thinking of ordination to know about. So what would be other types of ways that you can structure a monkhood than the one that we heard about here?
Oh, there's so many ways to approach it. And again, it just depends on the person. Depends on the type of meditation you want, the type of community you want. Are you more of an introvert or extrovert? The type of food you need. I had a friend that he needed food that was more like what he was used to in the West, as far as the way it was cooked and stuff. And if he didn't, he actually had physical problems. So at all kinds of levels, physical and mental, we have different needs. And perhaps in time we can let go of some of those, or that shifts and changes. But so you can do samatha meditation, vipassana meditation. You can be a forest monk, or you could live in a city as a monk. Like you can live in nature. Like, just so we all have different proclivities. There's also the teacher. Like, what teacher do you resonate with? And what style? So that can be. I was just talking earlier about planning travel versus serendipitous travel. Your monastic life can be exactly the same. You can plan it as much as you want, and there's a lot of options out there for how to approach that. Small monastery, big monastery, scholastic monastery, or pariyati patipati, like there's a variety. Or you can just kind of step into the stream and see what arises to meet you. So.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And sounds like your talk there was getting you had some competition with a backyard rooster. Yeah, and that's a whole other topic, a whole other or long discussion you could have. And we got into that briefly with Seale Piedasi, where we had mentioned that some meditators do look at the idea of monasticism as just a meditation course for the rest of your life every day, which it's very much not.
Right.
But to move the conversation along with limited time, another topic that struck me was just hearing about the development of these teachings over time in a different context. This is a theme we've talked about a lot ourselves over the years, and one that I'm quite fascinated in. Daniel gives a great background and color commentary to descriptions to what it was like as Goenkaji was first setting these up, and what it felt like to be a student. Funny, colorful anecdotes, and also talking about protocols. For example, one of the things that struck me was he was mentioning this story about how the Dhamma hall seating was first come, first serve. That's in contrast to today at Vipassana centers in the SN Goenka tradition, where it's assigned seating based on the number of courses that you've sat. And it's a very subtle difference that the seating would be arranged one way or the other. But when you're on a silent retreat where you're getting to such a degree of sensitivity and awareness, these things do come to have an effect. And it's interesting to see how that changed over time. If you go back even one step beyond that, in the research that we did for the Meditator's Guidebook, we spoke to people that were familiar with Sayathaji's teaching back in the day. And they described how Sayathaji would actually have the new students closest to him and the old students as far in the back as possible, almost like creating this Dhamma sandwich, so that the new students were just enveloped in this vibe, these Dhamma vibes in all directions. So that was these are subtle things, and maybe there's not many other people nerding out on them like I am, but I just find it interesting to think about the mindset that goes into creating the course structure and how that's changed over time and how that's then affected the course experience as a result.
Right. Well, what struck me is like this very, very experienced conductor of Goenka courses, teacher. He gives a lot of examples about how things were and how things are, and how things get codified. And of course, so in time, how to say, the codification develops over time due to certain conditions. But he seems to be saying, like, almost like a warning, that some of these things just developed in the moment because of that moment, and they're not necessarily applicable in a codified way, and that could be lost. That people, developing a sense of understanding how, the general guidelines and the basics, and then trusting wisdom and intuition to adapt to different situations, like what he must be doing with conducting courses and setting up courses in Africa and South America.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that was a good training ground. Yeah, he talks so much about the flexibility and the openness and the curiosity that Goenkaji had
Yes.
about his students' background. And then with that, he makes this plea for open-mindedness for more established senior teachers to have towards students or junior teachers, in this vein of how Goenkaji was flexible and open-minded, and how approachable and accessible Goenkaji was himself. I mean, he describes group sittings at his very home, that all these hippies, I was going to say dirty hippies, but, maybe some of them were, Daniel definitely wasn't a hippie. Maybe some of the hippies were showering, some weren't, just playing off a stereotype there. But he has, in any case, his own home is open for people coming to just do a group sitting and then leave. And that sense of openness and inclusion and community and flexibility, curiosity, those kinds of values that he's describing in those days were very inspiring to see where it came from. And, also his encouragement to keep these values alive, even as structures become structures, both in terms of protocol and also in terms of actual physical buildings and lands, even as those become more codified, that these early values still have their place.
Right. I was actually looking at it in the sense of the choice. So you have this example of a teacher in Goenka, and as it expands or after he's gone, there's a choice to either codify the decisions themselves or codify the style of decision making. And Daniel, with so much experience, seems to be strongly advocating for codifying the style, the approach of discernment in decision making, rather than codifying decisions.
Yeah, that's a good point. And he gives the examples of how, I think it was Goenkaji that told him, you want to build a center that your mother can go to. And if your mother is from, I can't remember the examples he gives, but if your mother is from Costa Rica or from Uganda or from Austria or wherever, there's going to be different expectations for what would be comfortable in a center.
I think he was referring to the type of toilet, at least.
Right.
A hole in the back that had the right accoutrements there, that some people would be totally 100% comfortable with that, and others would be mortified. So I can understand why certain decisions get made in different places and different times, right? So, we haven't talked about this yet. It's easy to look back in hindsight and say, well, and even to judge sometimes. So it's good to be relaxed on that and understanding how things arose, and that you made a pretty big point about that in the interview, and to just appreciate the difficulty of the situation. At the same time, it's also the other side of that same coin, though, is to go the opposite direction from judgment of those things and being so critical is to making them so sacred that you never actually reevaluate those things. And if I understand Daniel correctly, it's to have that discernment and not to be attached to decisions, and to be able to reevaluate and move with discernment in time and place, just like he's doing. So I think he's a great role model for what he's actually suggesting and hoping. It's what he seems to be hoping for that tradition.
Yeah, and because he lived through it all, he really is speaking from this direct experience. He was a direct disciple of Goenkaji, and he was studying under him at a time when the courses were taking off, and then he went around the world setting these courses up, helping these courses to be conducted, and the students to get these lessons. And so through this wealth of many decades of past experience, he's in this real prime position to be able to talk on what he witnessed and what he saw, and then how it spread and expanded. And through the growth, the changes that he saw from his memories, his very clear memories of the early stages. So that was quite interesting.
Right. That's interesting. And a lot of it's interesting. I mean, that whole tradition is in an interesting spot with Goenka not being around anymore, and which way they'll move. And here we got to hear a voice of an elder giving some guidance into what he sees as valuable and what he sees are some possible dangers. So I really appreciated that. That was interesting.
Yeah, and the level of service that he has brought to so many people, and his whole and the presence that he brought to the interview, just the joy, the giggles, I want to say charm. I mean, charm might not be exactly the right word. Maybe a natural charm that just kind of shines off. It was just an absolute pleasure to have him here personally, and I think that a lot of that joyousness just bubbled over through the voice onto the headphones that listeners can hopefully capture as they take it in.
Well, that was certainly my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So great. So same time next week.
Yeah, see you next time. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Look forward to that one, and take care in the higher temperatures, huh?
Trying to, at least I have a river to jump into next week.
Yeah, boy, I don't have that. Okay. Okay, talk to you later.
Thanks. See you next time.
You have been listening to the Insight Myanmar podcast. We invite you to rate, review, and share our podcast, as every little bit of feedback helps. You can also subscribe to the Insight Myanmar podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, make sure to check out our website for our complete episodes, including additional text, videos, and other information at www.insightmyanmar.org. That's one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR.org. If you cannot find our feed on your podcast player, please let us know, and we will ensure that it can be offered there in the future. There was certainly a lot to talk about in this episode, and we'd like to encourage listeners to keep the discussion going. Make a post, suggest a guest, request specific questions, and join in on discussions on our Insight Myanmar podcast Facebook group. And also welcome to join our Facebook and Instagram accounts by the same name of Insight Myanmar. If you're not on Facebook, you can also message us directly at burmadhamma@gmail.com. That's BURMADHAMMA@gmail.com. Or if you'd like to start up a discussion group on another platform, let us know and we can share that forum. We would also like to take this time to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, especially our two sound engineers, Martin Combs and Tharng A, along with Zach Hessler, content collaborator and part-time co-host. Ken Pransky helps with editing, Kishingbat Gamble does our social media templates, and Dragos Bandita and Andre Francois make our sketches. We'd also like to thank everyone who has assisted us bringing the guests who have made up the show thus far, as well as the guests themselves for agreeing to come and share. Finally, we are immensely grateful for the donors who made this entire thing possible. We also remind our listeners that the opinions expressed by our guests are their own and not necessarily reflective of the host or other podcast contributors. If you find the Dhamma interviews we are sharing of value and would like to support our mission, we welcome your contribution. You may give monthly donations at Patreon at www.patreon.com/insightmyanmar, or one-time donations on PayPal at www.paypal.me/insightmyanmar. In both cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word. If you are in Myanmar and would like to give a cash donation, please feel free to get in touch with us.
Yeah.